Hello, everyone. Welcome to Beyond Life Paranormal Research Missouri's podcast. I'm your host, Russel Reynolds. With me tonight is Tina Irwin, who is a author of several books. She's also a retired commander for the U.S. Navy. She's also part of Ghost Helpers, and she's here to talk to us tonight a little bit about what she does. Without further ado, here's Tina Irwin.
Thank you,
Hi,
Russ.
Tina.
Thank you so much. I really love being here.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for coming on the show. So tell my audience a little bit about yourself and what you do.
I'm like a lot of people, you wake up one day, you discover you can do some things, and that started as a child. Children don't know that not everyone can do what they do or see what they see. My abilities did not really kick in till I met my husband, and he was a love at first sight kind of a guy. I knew I had been married to him before, so I had that past life feeling, and we've been married 50 years, and I still love the guy. He's just a really great guy. Once I met my husband, all these abilities started to kick in, and I began to be able to see ghosts or feel them or know when they were there. But I didn't know how to help them. And everyone says, oh, they have unfinished business, or you should just tell them to go away or banish them or burn sage. And none of those things work. They are, frankly, worthless.
Right.
What I realized was that no one knew how to cross them over. We lived in Italy, and that was a crazy time, but we moved back from Italy to Charleston, South Carolina, and the whole state is haunted. I mean, you've got layers and layers of stacks of time. And a stack of time is a time period in which something occurred. So you can have a piece of property and have innumerable stacks of time, some of which nothing happened on, and some of which a lot happened on. We bought a house that was 18 months old that was profoundly haunted because the ground underneath it was part of an Archdale plantation that was in place from the 1600s. And the ghost we had was very mischievous and knocked on walls and ran down the hall and broke things and stole things and saved my life one time and woke us up so we weren't late from. I mean, I can go on and on with the things this ghost did. But I inherently felt that and I felt like he was a man, that he needed to be crossed over. Well, I found out my entire neighborhood was haunted.
Wow.
My neighbor had some of the same things happen in her house. Another lady had a house where she would come downstairs every morning and all of her furniture was completely rearranged and she didn't hear a thing. She moved. Another lady would come downstairs and her rocking chair would be rocking facing a blank wall, and it had been moved during the night. Somebody else felt like his house had been built over a stable because he heard horses all night.
Mm-hmm.
I've never heard of horses haunting a place, but that happened to him. And the stories just went on, and I thought, how do we help the land? How do we cross over the ghosts? How do we do something specific? And it took me a large part of my life to figure it out. And I finally learned how to cross them over by a guy who was practicing, unfortunately, he was practicing black magic and doing some pretty nasty things to try to harm me. I was able to repel that attack, and in the process, he died in repelling that attack. And all of a sudden, I could see him in my mind's eye leave his body, and one of my brothers happened to be with him, and he said, my gosh, what's happening? I said, this guy died. What he was sending to me, he just died of. I said, wow. And then he said, my brother said, let's cross him over. And I said, that's a great thing to do. I'm not quite sure I know how to do that. But we all have a first day, right? And so we asked for help. I mean, it's amazing if you ask God to help you, what remarkable things can come to you. And the next thing we know, we asked for some angels because, we asked for help. And then it looked like this giant rock kind of rolled away, and we saw this golden crescent of the most astonishing, beautiful, welcoming, warming light.
Mm-hmm.
While we're looking at this guy and we're encouraging him to move toward the light, these horrible black lower realm intelligences start coming and grabbing at him. And if you remember the movie Ghost, with Whoopi Goldberg and Patrick Swayze, when the bad guys died, these little guys with beady red eyes would come for them. Those guys are real. They're called lower realm intelligences, and there are ways you can get rid of them. And when someone does some really bad things, these intelligences can come for that soul, and that's what I could see happening, which is very unnerving, needless to say. But we gave him some energy, and we nudged him toward the light, which is hard to explain, because all of a sudden I'm now remote viewing. And that's like a new skill set that opened up. And as that opened up and he moved toward the light, he stopped and he looked at me and he said, "I tried to kill you. Why would you help me?" I said, "Well, because you're not mine to judge."
Right.
And then later I was thinking to myself, well, maybe there was a part of you that was missing, and that's what made you so evil. And if I believe the 23rd Psalm, that he restoreth my soul, if I believe in the goodness of God and the divine, wouldn't I want everyone to have the benefit of having that part of them that was missing restored? It was an act of compassion, which I am grateful my brother was there because we did it together. I didn't have to face that first time alone. But after that, I knew how to do it. So I could do it. It didn't matter what the number was. I now knew how to do it. But I realized in 2012 that I couldn't do it forever. If I were abducted by aliens tomorrow, somebody needs to know how to do this other than me, right?
Right.
So I wrote something called the Crossing Over Prayer. And I had it beta tested, and of all places, a very expensive handbag store. I'm talking $1,000 a handbag at a mall in San Diego. And I had gone in because I dropped my iPhone and I had an iPhone store appointment with the Genius Bar. So I thought, well, I'm early for the appointment. I'll go shopping. And I looked at the handbag store and I'm talking to the staff and I said, I just wrote these ghost books. And they said, oh my gosh, this store is so haunted. And I said, you have hundreds of thousands of dollars of handbags and your store is haunted? And she said, you can't imagine. The racks move and we hear voices and we feel like somebody's watching us. You've got to help us. Can you cross over who's here? So I said, sure. So I remote viewed the place and I found several homeless men, crossed them over. I found this pair of women who had a car accident, and then they went right back into Fashion Valley and started shopping again. They shopped till they dropped, and they just kept shopping. So I crossed over. Well, things were okay for a couple days because we were talking about it, and I said, I'm going to write a prayer, and you're going to beta test it, and they were thrilled. So I wrote something called the Crossing Over Prayer, and these cards are actually on ghosthelpers.com, and the Crossing Over Prayer is also in the Crossing Over Prayer book. And the store manager and her staff beta tested this. I made one or two tweaks, and they were able to remove the homeless that were coming in day after day. And then I did a radio show in Belgium, of all places. And the show host took the Crossing Over Prayer and he walked the cemeteries and the battlefields of World War I and II, crossing over the dead. And he would hear these thank yous, for the hours that he was doing it over and over again. So we know that it works. And we know that it enables people to be empowered. Instead of feeling like you have the power no one else has, if you give people the power to clear their own home or cross over a loved one, if your child dies, you don't want someone haunting them. You want someone helping them. And the goal of these prayers is to enable anyone to help another soul at any time. That's the sort of a coconut shell of what happened to me.
Oh, nice. What are some of the books that you have written?
In addition to the Crossing Over Prayer book, I've written Ghost Stories from the Ghost Point of View. Let me turn it this way. And there are 3 volumes. And there are a total of 63 stories among the 3 books. And they tell all different ways that psychic ability can be used and all different kinds of ghosts that a person can encounter. Ghosts from 400 or 500 years ago. You know, ghosts of someone who died a week ago or 50 years. It doesn't matter. These talk about what it's like to be dead. So you have the ghost point of view. I have written a grief book, The Lightworker's Guide to Healing Grief, The Lightworker's Guide to Everyday Karma, a book on karma and frequency, how to raise your frequency, which can change your life. And one of my most recent books was Soul Evolution, Past Lives and Karmic Ties, because we carry our karma with us from life to life. That's why you don't want somebody to erase your karma, because if you did some really good things, you don't want somebody to remove that. Not that,
Right.
I mean, Christ can't erase your karma, so don't let somebody tell you that because it's simply untrue. So I've written 8 books. I have 2 more that I'm in late stage editing that I'm hoping to publish at the first of the year, and those will be on psychic children.
Okay. Do you go out with teams and investigate paranormal, like residential houses and stuff like that?
I don't do that because, in my opinion, it's dangerous for the psychic. I remote view. I can remote view any place, in the world. I remote viewed a place in Russia where a guy had a problem with his brain and was able to fix that. And so I don't need to go there.
Okay.
I can remote view the location. It's much safer for the psychic, and it gives me a far greater range.
Awesome. Do you do any metaphysical stuff like burning of sage or anything like that, or?
No, sage has no horsepower. You have to burn dragon's blood. When Christ was born, as we're in the Christmas season right now, the gifts of the Magi were gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And since I was a really pesky little kid, I wanted to know what's frankincense and myrrh. And nobody could answer that question when I grew up. Well, it's the gift of the Magi. And I said, I know, but I get the gold thing because, it's kind of a nest. But what's frankincense and myrrh? Frankincense is extremely important. It's a resin. But you can burn frankincense. You can make frankincense water and drink the water, which I do every day. You can use frankincense oil. The reason Christ was given myrrh, the oils of frankincense and myrrh, which is also a resin, is myrrh turbocharges frankincense. It's like if you're going to take the the supplement turmeric and you add pepperine or pepper to turmeric, you have expanded the capacity of the turmeric by 1,000. That is what myrrh does. So if you combine the resin of frankincense, myrrh, dragon's blood, and then a 4th resin called benzoin, you crush them up and you burn those, you will clear a house. You must leave a window open. But sage has no horsepower. It's great for sausages and ceremonies. Native Americans use it for years. Sage is used throughout the Middle East, but they do not use it to clear a location. They use frankincense because they know how powerful it is.
Right. And that's what we use. We use that frankincense when we do our cleansing and the dragon's blood.
There you go. I mean, I have watched people get white sage, green sage, every kind of sage, burn billowing bundles of sage, and the ghosts are still standing there going, what is with this woman?
Right.
But when you burn these other resins, they're a different frequency. Everything in the universe is math. That's
Right.
wrote books on frequency. Everything is math. So the higher a frequency of a location, it becomes virtually impossible for a dark intelligence, a black magician, lower realm intelligences to be there. The higher you raise your frequencies, you facilitate the presence of angels. And all of these things, it's always about what is the frequency at the moment. Does that make sense?
Right. Yep. Because like us, we deal with a lot of the darker stuff. That's what we mainly get called for.
Well, in the Crossing Over Prayer book, I have a prayer that is called the Dark Intelligence Removal Prayer. And there's a prayer for clearing the stacks of time. And I've cleared just thousands of different places in North Carolina, Virginia, South Carolina. And if you have a location that had so many things happen, I mean, if you looked at Virginia, in the Civil War, there were 4,000 battles. 2,000 of those battles took place in Virginia. 800,000 people died in the Civil War. So the echoes of the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the deaths through slavery, you have stack after stack after stack after stack of time and dead. An awful lot of slaves were killed, they died of natural causes, they were murdered, they had horrible deaths, and they were buried in unmarked graves. Well, those deaths, those souls will create problems on a piece of property. And I talk about that in the ghost books. And there was one piece of property I was asked to clear in North Carolina. And I started out, and the first group I found were slaves who survived the Civil War, but they were starving to death. I mean, when you get the point of view of a slave who was killed by any method, it changes your viewpoint on life for the rest of your life. When
Right.
they you, and it hopefully it opens the heart of compassion for any soul who died in such a horrific way. Many of them. Some of them didn't die in a horrific way. Starvation was rampant for black and white people after the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
So on that piece of property, you had slaves who were murdered and buried in an unmarked grave. You had a couple who couldn't get anything to grow. He killed her, and then he committed suicide. So now you've got murder and suicide on the property, and I'm here to tell you nothing would grow. So from the late 1800s until almost 2000, that property had nothing on it. Developer bought it, decided to develop it. And from that point on, the couple who bought that house, nothing worked. They were sick. They kept seeing things. They kept feeling things. Nothing would grow. Every single plant died. Their children were seeing things. They were exhausted. They were sick. And so they said, they were so furious because I've heard people not tell me what the problem is. It's like, it's an ethics thing. If I find it, you know what I mean? They started blurting out. I said, you really need to stop. Let me see what I find. We'll regroup. So we had those two groups of dead, and then we had her dad. The wife's dad was trying to look after the family, and he didn't realize it's kind of exacerbating the problem because we had ghosts from 3 different stacks of time. Once they were all crossed over, and I gave healing to the land, and I taught them how to give healing to the land, how to clear their house, what these resins to use. Plants started to live. They got to sleep at night. The kids slept in their own bed, and their house didn't have cold spots anymore. So you have this, instead of this cascade of things happening that are just destroying their lives, now what they have is life again. They can live again. It just makes a huge difference.
Right. Missouri is a big hotbed for it too, as well, because of all the slavery that was out here, and then Civil War. Then you had the Mormon massacres that went on around the area.
And see, if you don't live in an area or research what has happened in an area, you might not appreciate the events that took place. It looks like an ordinary piece of land, but there are this mosaic and different, it's like looking at layers of sediment on the side of a cliff. You have layers of energy in any location, and just because you can't see them doesn't mean they don't exist. So you're absolutely, I certainly concur with everything you're saying.
And we've got one known location, which they actually tore it down in 74, was actually a slave house. The guy was an Irish merchant, and he was in the Civil War. He was in the Union militia in the Civil War, and he had slaves, and he owned a store in the town as well. So, and they say there's a lot of activity going on out there with all the slaves that had died out there, and he used to mistreat them, is what I read in the history about him. And we're actually getting ready to go do a case nearby there tomorrow night.
Well, I would like to. The Crossing Over Prayer is on ghosthelpers.com, and it's absolutely free. I mean, I encourage anyone. I mean, you can order the prayer cards on ghosthelpers.com. It's also, the Crossing Over Prayer is also an audiobook available through Audible. And playing the prayer basically opens a spiritual doorway, and you're giving the gift of compassion and healing to souls who have not known it. See, there's no time where they are at death.
Right.
They don't feel the passage of time, but there's a sense of coldness that starts to set in with them that is crushing to the soul. And when you open this light, which is what these prayers do, there's 88 prayers in this book for crossing over the dead, alcoholics and drug addicts and murderers, murdered people and suicides and murderers, and that you can be extremely specific if you would like to be. And when you do those things, the heart of compassion is so powerful. It changes something within yourself. You feel that you've done a huge spiritual service for people you didn't know, but those souls will be grateful to you forever. It is right. It is such a peaceful, amazing thing to do, and you can do it without fear.
Right, especially like us, we're in there to help those lost souls move on, because a lot of them don't realize they're dead, and they feel that they're trapped. Some of them are still looking for their families too. We've come across a few of those that are looking for their families, and they're trapped here because they think their family's here, but their family's gone and moved on to heaven.
That's right. That issue, you're one of the very first people I've ever spoken to who said there's so many of them don't know they're dead. That is absolutely true. I have encountered this over and over and over. And it is it's so unnerving. I've told this story many times, that my brother used to work for Screen Actors Guild, Hollywood, SAG-AFTRA. And I got this phone call from him, and he said, oh my gosh, a friend of mine, a producer, was her car broke down, and somebody sideswiped her and killed her. And he said, I can feel she's on the side of the road. She doesn't know she's dead. He said, can you remote view her and cross her over? And I followed my Aka cord from myself to my brother to the producer. That's how I located her. Because somebody was going, well, how could you find her? That's how I found her. And she's walking along the side of the road on her cell phone, and she's just so angry. Why don't I have cell service? This is just ridiculous. I try to talk to this cop, and she's muttering to herself, and she looks at me, and she can see me. I look like this unusual being to her. And she says, can you make my phone work? Can you talk to that cop? Because I don't understand it. Why can you see me? And I said, well, because I hate to tell you this, but you died. And she said, oh, I can't be dead. I have a birthday party on Saturday. I have a big meeting with Paramount on Monday, and we're working on this new film. And I have a nail appointment tomorrow. So you don't understand. I can't be dead. I've got a lot to do. I said, I am so sorry. I am so sorry to be the one that has to tell you this. But see this big angel I brought in for you? This angel is going to escort you into that beautiful light you see right there. She said, my children, my husband, I can't be dead. I had so much to do. I said, I'm so sorry. I truly, my heart goes out to you, but it's over now. It's time to go. Because if she is left on the side of the road, she creates an accident frequency on the side of the road. So if you're driving down the side of the road and you see all those little crosses people place, that means that there are probably ghosts still there. Cross those people over. Cross the country several times. I've crossed over thousands of people at those crosses on I-40 and I-10. So my hope is that if someone else happens to encounter those, do the most compassionate thing you can do and cross those souls over. Some of them, they still think that, they're waiting for help to come. They don't know they're dead.
And we just did a case not too long ago where we got called in to help a family, and our one team that we work with, she's a psychic medium, and she was able to pick up on a gentleman that was killed in a car accident, and he didn't realize he was dead. He was looking for his family, and we were actually able to send him on his way.
Well, that's really awesome. That's just fantastic.
And he showed her how he died and everything. His head hit the windshield.
Mm-hmm.
And he did. He left on his way, and we never picked him back up on the equipment at all after that.
Well, I cleared an island in the Pacific. It was so weird how that happened. And there were so many battles and so many ships that sank. The theory was that this was some of the crew of the Indianapolis. May not be the Indianapolis. I can't remember the destroyer it was. The destroyers are not my area. Submarines are my area. But they thought they swam to an island.
Mm-hmm.
They were killed in the water. It was horrible what happened to them. And the commanding officer of the destroyer, the Tin Can, knew that his crew was dead. And I said, how come you know you're dead and they don't? And he said, these big dumb guys, they keep thinking somebody's going to come and rescue us, but we all died that night. I know we did. There's nobody ever going to come. He said, how long have we been here? And I said, long time, this is the year 2000 something. And he said, oh, it's been a long time. And we lined them all up and gave them some healing blankets and crossed them all over. And they were in shock. And the CO was the last to cross. And he just smiled and thanked me, and off he went. I got to tell you, it's among the most rewarding things you can do is to help the dead. The living are so much harder.
Well, I know my cousin Ed Warren there, he was actually in the Navy, and he was on one of those ships that got hit in World War II by the Japanese that sunk, and he made it out. He didn't think he was going to.
Well, it happens.
His son-in-law tells the story on how that all went down and how Ed made it out of there.
I guess it wasn't his time to go.
No.
Wasn't his time to go.
Came back, met Lorraine, and they went and started doing all the paranormal stuff and the demonology, and went on from there.
Yeah, there's some really dark things. People can open up doorways of darkness, and I think sometimes it starts innocently, but they don't realize that some of these tools they think that are helping them are potentially destroying their lives. I
Right.
talk about that a lot. So
Yeah, it's like Ouija boards too. When you're a kid, you think it's a game, you play with it, and you think you're talking to your dead friend, your dead loved one, and something else is coming through there that's disguising itself. And then kids get scared, they leave that door open, and there you go. It's with you for the rest of your life.
that is remarkably true. That is astoundingly true. I was approached by the Learning Channel to clear a house. I don't know where it was. And they said that their teenage sons kept creating their own Ouija boards. And they wanted me to just clear the house. And I said no, because the parents have lost all control. And these dark intelligences are controlling their sons. I don't have jurisdiction to go into their sons and remove these beings.
Right.
The clearing the house will never fully happen till those kids are completely cleared first. And the parents felt like they couldn't do that. So I said, I don't care what psychic you get, you're going to have a problem. The other really dark tool are tarot cards. A tarot card will open up a door to darkness and fool you into thinking you're powerful, and it feeds your ego, and it creates an addiction. This is so true for women. They keep them in their nightstand, and of all places, they keep their tarot cards in their underwear drawer. I have watched them, and I ask these women, why do you do that? And they go, I don't know. I had one woman in her mid-30s. She had 2 little boys, and she was completely bedridden. No doctor could figure out what was wrong, and somebody sent her to me. And her husband thought that was a real crackpot thing to go to a psychic. And he said, what do you think you're going to do? And I said, well, I'm going to ask you how many tarot card decks your wife owns. And he said, well, does that have to do anything? And I said, well, you know what? Maybe nothing, but maybe everything. So you guys are going to do an experiment. You're going to get a box, and you're going to put all the decks in. And this woman had 25 decks. She eventually found more. I think it was like 30 different tarot card decks. That you're going to line a box with aluminum foil, shiny side in. And you're going to put all those decks in that box, and you're going to line the box. You're going to cover the box with more foil on the outside, shiny side in. And you're using the effect of the aluminum foil as a mirror, and you're returning all that dark energy to the cards. And I said, that's all we're going to do today. Just do that one thing and then call me. 24 hours later, the husband calls me and he says, I got my wife back. She got up. She made breakfast. She's not sick anymore. What did you do? And I said, you did it. I gave you a piece of information to use. They are dangerous. Well, then I get a phone call from this husband a week later, and he says, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, there's a stench in our garage. And I said, that's the cards. And so he took it to a dumpster, and he got rid of the entire box. And he said, we got our life back. I can't. He was stuttering. He was so stunned. He would never have believed it. And I said, tarot cards are a trap. And you see people who have not just one, but they might have 25, 30. I had a friend, she was a wonderful woman. She had 50 decks. She died penniless. She had so many cancers. She died homeless. It was a horrible death. It's like she was separated from her children, even her ex-husband, who was always kind to her. And to her last breath, she kept saying it wasn't the cards, it wasn't the cards. And at some point, you got to let go and say, that's your choice to believe that. But the experiment that I'm offering is so benign and so easy. Oh, and inside that box, we sprinkled salt, and it acts like acid. That's the stench she smelled.
Wow, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
I don't dabble with them. I work with a team. She does tarot and stuff like that.
You might ask her to put them. Ask her if she's willing to do that experiment. Put that in a box of, or just wrap the deck in aluminum foil, shiny side in, with salt, and put it away. If you are a really good psychic, I submit you do not need those. You need to trust yourself, not the cards. The cards
Right.
are an illusion, and they're a dangerous illusion. You can be readily manipulated by them. I have watched it happen. One woman had cards and a bunch of other things. Her teenage daughter got into them, and I don't know what happened, but the daughter died almost immediately. It was a very, very sad thing. So I encourage people to remove the cards and start embracing prayer. I'm not running around saying, oh, you have to read the Bible, because it's been edited for 2,000 years.
Right.
Suggesting that make up the prayers yourself if you have to, or use a crossing over prayer book. Find what's in your heart and start praying directly to God. You will be astounded at the connection you will make with the divine. And it will be a much cleaner, purer connection. And it's a problem in the New Age community. There's an awful lot of people have suffered spiritual abuse. And the spiritual abuse is among the worst forms of abuse because it separates the soul from God.
Right.
That's why priests and clergymen who abuse children suffer horrific karma, because they have separated a child from God. It incurs some horrendous karma.
Right. What's your theory on like children spirits when they die? I know like some theories say that the children are actually demonic, that God does not let a child remain here. He takes them.
Well, I got to say that's not true. I have never seen that. It goes back to physics. Energies
Right.
are destroyed, whether it's an aborted baby, a miscarried baby, a child who dies at birth, a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, doesn't matter. You have the energy of the soul is still existing. And most of the time they're existing in the fourth dimension, because a child or a baby is clueless as to what to do at death. That's why there's a crossing over prayer for miscarriage, for abortion, for babies, for children. There's separate prayers for each of those. If you don't have those, just use the crossing over prayer. I had a case where I have had ghosts who were visiting my grandchildren, and my daughters-in-law or my sons would call me, and they'd say, we think there's something here. Can you look? And each time it was a child that was attracted, a ghost child attracted to a living child. They weren't demonic or evil. They were just incredibly lonely. And they didn't understand why mommy wasn't paying attention to them.
Right.
One little girl was going after my grandson, and I found her, and I said, what happened to you? She said, I don't know. Mommy won't talk to me anymore. I go home with a different child every day. And she went home with my granddaughter, who was much older than my grandson. And she said, and this little boy, this little baby, he can see me. He was 11 months old. And I said, sweetie, what's the last thing you remember? I was swinging. I was swinging so high. And I said, let me guess, you let go. I did. I was going to fly like a bird. And then mommy was crying and I didn't understand. So one of the hardest things to do is to tell a child that they died.
Right.
But to facilitate that, I always request that a child angel come in, not a 7-foot angel, because that's a little intimidating even for an adult.
Yeah.
I request a child angel, and the child angel slips their hand in the child or baby's hand, or I bring an angel and they pick up a baby and they cross them over. And there is a beauty to that. Some children are so smart. There was a 7-year-old who died. There was a cluster death in Virginia Beach, and this child died of pneumonia. And her parents were clinging to her for dear life. And her parents were right at the edge of suicide, and they had a second child. And this little girl came to me at one of the worst moments in my life. My niece had just died. She was 6. She sat next to my sister on the sofa and she said, "Mommy, I feel hot." And she was dead that fast.
Oh, wow.
And it was so stunning that when you're faced with the death of a child who is a family member and you're close to this child, the grief hits you like a truck. It hits you in your chest and you're emotionally reeling from it. And I called my brother to tell him, and he said, "We have to cross her over." And my frequency had dropped so precipitously, I couldn't do it. So I called him back, and together we crossed her over. Well, while I'm in Virginia for the funeral and the aftermath of the death of a child, this family reached out to my sister and her family because their child had died 3 weeks before. And there was a goodness to them and they wanted to help. They knew the torture of losing a child. Well, their child came to me, and her name was Rachel, and she said, "My mom's going to kill herself. You've got to help her." So we were able to, get her not to kill herself. And then we all visited that family, my sister and my brother-in-law, my niece, a couple of days later. And it's a really awkward conversation. It's great on television when the psychic goes and they're in adorable clothes and perfect hair. But when you're haggard because you're grieving because your heart is just shattered, and now you have to help somebody else. The family said, "Well, we like to think our daughter crossed over." And I said, "I'm here to tell you she didn't. She's right here with me. And your last job as her parents is to cross her over." And the father, who was a physician, looked me straight in the eye and he said, "I know she's here. I don't want to let her go." And I said, "It's the last job as her parent. It's time to release attachment. Doesn't mean you stop loving her. Doesn't mean you continue to send her love. You have to let her go." So I did a few things and enabled both parents to see her. And I brought in angels to surround the parents and the child, and they crossed her over themselves. And I mean, they were just, tears are rolling down their faces. And when it was over, it's like the sun came out. It was remarkable, a remarkable moment. And they started to smile, and they said it was such a beautiful experience. They said, "It's a hard job to do, but when you cross over your child or your teenager or your spouse or your friend who committed suicide or your friend who was murdered, you are offering the greatest gift a mortal person can give someone who has died, and that is the benefit of the light."
Oh, awesome. I know there was one case that we did. The child had been killed by her ex-boyfriend who was drunk in high school.
Yeah.
And she's buried in the cemetery to be closer to her mom. Well, we actually captured her on EVPs crying like she's wanting to be released. She's trapped in that cemetery and can't leave. But the mother does not want us to go out there and cross her over or anything like that. And I said, "Well, your daughter's trapped there. There's reasons why we're catching her on audio recorders crying."
Well, did she relent? Did she finally give in?
No.
Was it a public cemetery?
Yeah, it's a public cemetery. She's buried with a bunch of historical people, and one guy was a murderer. The legend, he used to own the property, and he killed all 5 of his wives mysteriously, and then shot his brother-in-law who was coming to kill him because he married the guy's sister. So the guy was not a very nice man.
Well, there's a prayer to cross over murderers. They really need to be crossed over. And a lot of people will say to me, "Well, we shouldn't do that because they should stay in hell." The problem is they reincarnate from that dimension. If you cross over, those parts of them that are shaved off life after life are restored. Mm-hmm. It doesn't erase the karma they created by the heinous acts they have committed. They still have to answer to that karma. But there is a chance that soul can be redeemed, and they have to atone in future lives. So over a murderer, and if it's a public graveyard, I'd go back and cross that child over, especially if it's public.
When we were there, she came out and said she owned the cemetery, but I did some looking on it, and it's a public historical cemetery.
If it's a public historical cemetery, take that child out of torture. It's really cruel to do that.
Right. But we respected her wishes and left that night, so we didn't cause any further trouble or anything like that. And we're going to make a trip back there and try to mend some fences with her and talk with her.
Well, there's another thing you can do. Wink, wink. You can take the prayer, just copy it down if you have to, and just bury it next or lay it next to her grave.
Okay.
And the prayer will take care of the rest. It basically opens a doorway and helps a lot of people. I have nurses that stick it in all these places in hospitals. That makes a huge difference. I was at I can't remember which plantation it was in Virginia, and there were all these slaves there, and it was private property, so I didn't have any jurisdiction to cross them over. But I said, if you follow me into the street, because ironically, the slave owners still have you enslaved. But if you walk into the street, I can cross you over. And they did. It was really cool.
That's a friend of mine's house that we did. They had confirmed slaves in there, but they made it that if the owners had died before the slaves did, that the slaves were free.
Were the slaves ever freed?
Yeah, they ended up going, I guess they ended up getting married and had a life of their own once the owners had passed on.
Well, that's a horrible thing to wish somebody's dead so you can be free. I mean, what a conundrum.
Yeah. And that house is pretty active till to this day. I mean, we've got some pretty substantial evidence out of there on camera.
I don't doubt it. And I just, when you have ghosts that interfere with the living, that ghost is still earning karma. The only way that the karmic clock stops is when you cross them over.
Right.
And I had a ghost jump in my car and make my brakes go right down to the floor. And it was terrifying. They can jump into your car and so distract you have an accident. Well, they earn karma for that.
Mm-hmm.
And when you cross them over, I don't care who they were or when they lived, you change that karmic path. You stop it. Stop that clock. And that means that they're not harming somebody else.
Right.
So there's no downside to crossing them over, not any. And it was interesting, my daughter-in-law and my son were stationed in Germany many years ago, and they had a pair of Siamese. And the Siamese would start to sneeze. She said, "What do you think that means?" I said, "Ghosts have a sooty energy. That's why a house that has ghosts is always dirty. No matter how much you clean it, that sooty energy is there. So your cats are inhaling it. So if we cross them over and we did it together, the cats will stop sneezing. It's going to save you a ton of money in vet bills."
Right.
I swear it worked. We crossed over children, we crossed over Nazis, we crossed over, concentration camp people. And she called me every time. And every time we performed that service, and her cats were the ones who alerted us. So your animals can really be helpful to you. Dogs that look off at this corner, animals that are chronically sick, very probably your house is haunted. So I mean, it's
That's
just
in any,
the logical thing.
cases we do, and they got animals. We ask them, like they'll ask us if the cats are okay. I said, yeah, we'd like you to leave the cats in there because they're pretty good indicators of spotting what's going on in your home.
Exactly. That is so true. It's absolutely true.
So we'll follow their cat around all night, watching them how they act and to see if they alert anything. Even dog too. A dog will do that too, growl, and
I've seen dogs do that as well. And
my dog used to do it.
another great thing is I cleared a house in Virginia Beach. This woman had 45 mirrors in this house, all of them antique. Some of them were so evil, it's like they were the doorway to hell.
Mm-hmm.
But this house was worse than even that because this woman had a fascination with the Civil War. So I do not know what possessed her, but she had they were pulling up the floors in some old Civil War hospital that had been it was a plantation. They made it into a Civil War hospital. She had them pull up all the floorboards because that had been the surgery. She had them shipped to her house in Virginia, and she covered the floor in her den with the floorboards that were covered in blood of Civil War soldiers. Who does that, right?
Yep.
And I asked her. She said, "Yes, but the wood is beautiful and it has all these colors and tones." I said, "But it doesn't bother you. It has the energy of death." No, why would that bother me? I don't know. And I said, "You've got a Nazi influence in your house." She said, "I do not." And I said, "Yeah, you do." And then she got really, really mad at me and said, "Look, I'm telling you what I see. You have a Nazi influence. I don't know what it is. I don't know where. So you have the Civil War influence, a lot of death, and you've got a Nazi influence, and you have horrendous mirrors. So until you start removing the mirrors and we start treating the floors and you find the Nazi influence, I can't fully clear your house."
Right.
And of course, she's mad at me. So I went to visit my sister in Virginia, and the woman invited us over. And we were able to clear it. We found the worst mirror in the house. And I said, would be, if you want to break the magic, break the mirror. And her kids said, "We ate that mirror." They ran out, got hammers, a big plastic bag. And I mean to tell you, they just were wailing away at that mirror. So I said, "Okay." Well, she said, "I have this really cool thing." And she had a painting. I won't reveal what the painting was, but it was a painting. And she pulls this box out of the closet, and there is a Nazi swastika burned into the wood. And she said, "Oh my God, that is a Nazi swastika. I did get this from Nazi Germany." I said, "You do realize this was stolen from some Jewish family or a Polish family or whatever family or French family?" "Yeah." I said, "You really need to turn this into the authorities." "I know, but I really wanted to own this really famous painting." And I said, "But an awful lot of people died." And connection, you have to understand, when you have an object that carries with it the karma of mass murder and genocide, that karma is going to come and hit you like a brick. Wonder why your life doesn't work? Look for something like that. She got rid of that painting. I think she turned it over to the authorities, which is the right thing to do. And she got rid of that mirror, and I think she eventually pulled up the floors. And the house eventually did sell, which is why she called me in the first place, because the house wouldn't sell. Real estate agents wouldn't even walk in the door. So, right. And it was better, but she said, "I really owe you an apology. I never even made the connection to the painting and the Nazis."
Ernest had a question for you. He says, when a paranormal team investigates a haunted location and everything is quiet and the team just goes about their business and just ignore the location, can the spirits get mad and make themselves known to get our attention?
Well, that implies a lot of things. One, if a ghost knows they're dead, then maybe. If a ghost has no idea that they're dead, they're not going to get angry. And a lot of times they can't see a paranormal team in the first place. And there's another element here. If they're in a different stack of time, they have no idea you exist because future time doesn't exist for them. So they would have no way of getting angry. It's just you just have to follow the logic trail. Now, if you have people who do know they're dead and they desperately want help and you aren't seeing or sensing them, and the owner keeps saying, I feel like there's something here, say the crossing over prayer anyway. You might find that it clears some things you didn't know needed clearing. It makes a huge difference. It's a powerful tool.
And George Alexander said, hello, everyone.
Hello, George.
We're almost to our hour mark. If anybody else has any questions, feel free to post them in the chat. How can people get a hold of you if they need you to cross any spirits over for them?
I have a website called Ghost Helpers with an S, ghosthelpers.com. And there's a contact me, contact at ghosthelpers.com. That works really well. All of the books that I have written are on that website. The Crossing Over Prayer is on the homepage. If you wanted to read it yourself right there, if you had a laptop or an iPhone, you could just read it. All the 6 of the 8 books are audiobooks, including the Crossing Over Prayer book. I have people who have play it, and they have my voice crossing these souls over. And a lot of people don't want to say it themselves, so they just have me do it for them. And that's worked extremely well for an awful lot of people. I get letters and emails about how that works. So ghosthelpers.com, and people write to me all the time, and sometimes I offer them different avenues for help of how they can get things done that helps the living and the dead. Remember, when you cross over the dead, you are dramatically helping the living who are still having experiences in a mortal life. And I got to say, I'm so grateful that you invited me on your show, because it gives me an opportunity to do my job, which is to teach the living to help the dead.
Yeah, definitely. You're more than welcome. I learned quite a bit too. I mean, with paranormal field, there's always something new to learn in it. And listening to the knowledge of other people on what they know on it actually helps a lot of us investigators out that go out and actually investigate it and help people, so we know other ways of crossing spirits over and helping them.
Exactly. And sometimes it's hard to differentiate between whether or not you have a ghost or a thought form. That is a real challenge sometimes. But there's a very simple tool for that. So there you go.
We got 1 minute left. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us tonight, and Tina Irwin for coming on the show with her knowledge. And again, Tina, I'd like to thank you for your service.
You're very welcome.
Everybody stay humble and have a Merry Christmas. We will be back next week. My next week's guest is Stephanie O'Reilly from the 1889 McIntyre Villa. So stay tuned. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you again. Thanks again, Tina.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.